Well, how do we make sense of the complexities of life? How do we make sense of it all? It seems sometimes like things are just a bit topsy-turvy in this world, don't they? And why is it that sometimes wicked people seem to get away with it, and other times bad things happen to seemingly good people? Now, how do we make sense of that? How do we make sense of all of the chaos of the world, the way that things just seem to happen, and sometimes there doesn't really seem to be a rhyme or a reason to it? And why is that the case? And that's what this passage in Ecclesiastes is helping us to think about. Thinking about how we put order into the world, how we make sense of our lives and what's going on in the world as well. So this passage starts out with those famous words about a time for everything. And Steph told me just this morning that the Birds did a song all about this, which I didn't know, but you might be thinking about that. That there's a time for everything. These are famous words. But if you look into what the teacher says about the times that go on, it's quite it's not just as simple as things which are good or bad. So, for example, he says in verse 5, there's a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. Is there anything good about scattering stones or gathering them? It just means just different things which happen. Or a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Now, both of those things can be good things at times. You know, that sometimes it's just wise to do one or the other. And that seems to be the message, isn't it? Just that stuff happens, and sometimes it's not necessarily good or bad, but it just is. Where is the order? And this prompts some people to look for things like karma. Now, you may have come across the belief that if you do enough good in this life, then in the next life, you're reincarnated as something better or get up to heaven or whatever. Or other people look to sort of yin and yang, that for everything good in life there's something bad that happens and you have to try and balance it all out. But how do we as Christians make order out of these kind of sometimes seemingly random events that happen in our life? Some of them good, some of them bad, some of them just aren't. Well, this is then what the teacher goes on to say, verses 9 to 14. He says, what do workers gain from their toil? And that's the key question. And this is what the theme that we keep circling round in Ecclesiastes, which is that if all that happens in life is that we whatever happens, we just end up in a box 6 feet under, then it just makes a mockery of whatever happens. All of the complexities of life, all of the good things, the bad things that happen, all of those other things, it just doesn't really matter. It's all meaningless. That's the phrase, the word that he keeps coming back to. And he says, I've seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He's saying it's a burden that is laid on us. What is that burden? He says he's made everything beautiful in its time. So God is the one who makes sense of all of our lives. God is the one who has a way of making beautiful the things that happen. But he says he has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. So the problem is that God is the one who can make sense of all of the chaos in the world, the things that happen in our lives, the good and the bad. We have a sense of eternity, it says. God's put eternity in our hearts. We know that there is a transcendence. There is something above what we can see and feel and touch. And yet, we can't see what God's doing from beginning to end. We don't see the bigger picture. And we can only see what we see day in and day out. And we can't take a step back and see what God sees. We know that there is more, but we can't see everything as God sees it. And he says this is like a burden. And he says in verse 13 that each of I know there's nothing better to do for people to be happy and do good while they live. That each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. Like we saw last week, it's when we find satisfaction in life, when we're able to take satisfaction in the regular day in and day out things, when we can enjoy the small things that we do, the little joys in life. That's a gift of God. When we're able to say, okay, maybe I don't understand everything that's going on, but I'm going to enjoy what I can enjoy, and I'm going to seek God in all of these things. That is how our lives start to make sense. And he says, I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added or taken away, and God does it so that people can fear him. So God is the only one who endures forever. And what God does works forever. What God does endures. So if we want lasting meaning beyond the here and now, if you want lasting meaning, then he's the one that we need to look to. We need to look to the one who can give our lives a transcendence, a meaning beyond the things which are simply in the here and the now. And so then the teacher, he goes on, verses 15 to 17, he talks about the future and looking at our lives with the perspective of the future and that God's perspective. He says, whatever is has already been, what will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. So he says that God, to God, everything is present to him. Now, that although to us, you might have a memory of things that happened in the past, and you might think, oh, I enjoyed that time with friends, I enjoyed that dinner, that holiday, whatever it may be. But we can't go back to then, it's only a memory to us. But to God, it's not only a memory to him. No, God is equally present to every point, because God is eternal. That's the point with God. So what does that mean? And this is what the teacher goes on to say. In verse 16, although we see, at the moment, we see wickedness in the place of judgment and wickedness in the place of justice. Verse 17, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked, a time to judge every deed. So that's the point. Although we may see at the moment wickedness abounding in many respects, and that doesn't make sense if we think about life just from the here and now. When we think about things from God's perspective, God does not forget. God doesn't forget wickedness. Now we may forget it. A human judge might overlook it. But God does not forget. And God will bring these things to account. God judges and he will make things right. And I think this is exactly why in the Bible, for example, in Romans chapter 12, verse 19, it says, verse 12, 19, do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. Do not take revenge. We can trust it to God, because he is the one who judges justly. So what can we say about life? And this is what this passage finishes off by saying. It says that, verse 18, as for humans, God tests them so they may see that they are like the animals. The teacher is saying that life is like a test. It's like a test for us. Thinking, are we just like the animals? He's saying, if you look at it from a merely human perspective, it seems like we just all die like the animals. There's nothing between us. We have the same breath. We have the same death. We're just like the animals, aren't we? And that's the test. That's the test. You see, if we are the same as the animals, then he's right, that everything is meaningless. But, as he says in verse 22, who can bring them to see what will happen after them? saying that death is God's way of reaching through to a people who've fallen away from him and saying, look, you're more than this. You need more than this. Our lives and death are supposed to be a testimony to us, a witness to us, that we are meant for more than this. That's the point of life, that it's like a test to see who is going to believe that we're just like the animals, who can believe that. Or actually it's the truth that God has made us for more, has made us for life, and death is an alien intrusion into our world. Now there's a famous sermon preached by C.S. Lewis called The Way to Glory, and he preached this I think in 1941, and it was published shortly afterwards. And I think this is probably one of the most insightful things that he's ever written, but he preached it to begin with. I'd like to read you just an excerpt from his sermon. It's a reasonably extensive excerpt, but I think Lewis is very clear, and I think it comes across really clearly as to what he's saying. So this is what he said. In speaking of this desire for our own far-off country, which we find in ourselves even now, I feel a certain shyness. I'm almost committing an indecency. I am trying to rip open the inconsolable secret in each one of you. The secret which hurts so much that you take your revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia and romanticism and adolescence. The secret also which pierces with such sweetness that when in very intimate conversation the mention of it becomes imminent, we grow awkward and affect to laugh at ourselves. The secret we cannot hide and cannot tell, though we desire to do both. We cannot tell it because it is a desire for something that has never actually appeared in our experience. We cannot hide it because our experience is constantly suggesting it, and we betray ourselves like lovers at the mention of its name. Our commonest expedient is to call it beauty and behave as if that had settled the matter. Wordsworth's expedient was to identify with certain moments in his own past. But all this is a cheat. If Wordsworth had gone back to those moments in the past, he would not have found the thing itself, but only the reminder of it. What he remembered would turn out to be itself a remembering. The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust for them. It was not in them, it only came through them. And what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. So I think this is exactly the message of Ecclesiastes. That when we enjoy life, the things that we enjoy, if we see those things as the ultimate things, if you see our existence here is only about eating and drinking and enjoying our families and friends and so on, if that's it, then of course we will never be satisfied, because in those things there is a longing for the one who gives them. We will never be satisfied unless we have a relationship and accept these things as a gift from a giver. That's what C.S. Lewis is saying, that in each of the good things in life, we see standing behind them the giver. And unless we see them as a gift from him, we will never be satisfied with them. They can never satisfy us. And he says this. He goes on to talk about how our society thinks that our entire good is to be found on this earth and how that happens. And then he finishes off. Do what they will then, we remain conscious of a desire which no natural happiness will satisfy. We have a desire which no natural happiness will satisfy. Only God can satisfy it. And I think that is the message of Ecclesiastes. That's the thing, that we look for something beyond, but if we look for what's beyond just in the things of this earth, we'll never find it. We need to look above. We need to look higher. So let's take a few conclusions, a few things to take into this week. I think the first thing is that do we admit that our longings can only be satisfied by God? Because God is the one at the end of the day who can satisfy us, who can give us what we long for, but only He can do that. We mustn't look for that in the things of this earth. They are gifts, but we must look to the one who gives them. So will we take our longings to Him? Will we allow Him to make sense of our days? Will we allow Him to make sense of the chaos of our lives and the chaos going on in the world at the moment? As it says in Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord. Will we trust justice to Him? Will we allow Him to make sense of the rights and wrongs that happen in our lives, in the world? This isn't saying we shouldn't seek justice. It's right to seek justice. But ultimately, He is the one who gives it. And we must pray for those who are still under this spell of the world, believing that every good thing can be found on this earth and in the things of this earth. As we say, both they're good things, but they're gifts. And unless we see them as a gift from God, they will never satisfy us. And too many people find this, and too many people live this way. So we need to pray for them.